What we make is we really try to create a culture that is supportive of business growth in Bristol. And specifically, obviously, we want to talk about manufacturing. So we make our manufacturers better. I like to think that. We help manufacturers out with employment issues, with equipment issues, technical assistance issues. So for us, to answer that question today is we make manufacturers better by creating a culture that is just supportive of all things manufacturing in Bristol.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. I got Justin Malley today. He's the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Bristol. Really excited to hear about what Bristol's doing and their embracing of manufacturing. Justin, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Listen, man, it was certainly my pleasure. And no sirs, my dad's not here. But listen, it's a Made in America podcast, Justin. Yeah. So we're going to start off with the same two questions. What do you make? And why do you make it?
What do we make? So I work for a municipality, City of Bristol, obviously, and I get this question actually a lot, phrased in a different way. What we make is we really try to create a culture that is supportive of business growth in Bristol. And specifically, obviously, we want to talk about manufacturing. So we make our manufacturers better. I like to think that. We help manufacturers out with employment issues, with equipment issues, technical assistance issues. So for us, to answer that question today is we make manufacturers better by creating a culture that is just supportive of all things manufacturing in Bristol.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And Justin, why do you do it? You know, why economic and community development, and why doing that in the city of Bristol?
Well, someone has to do it, right? And for us, we want to raise our hands and do this. We have a great Chamber of Commerce in Bristol as well. That's a huge partner for us in supporting this industry. And listen, communities focus on what their industry may be, and there are great communities in Bristol and larger cities that focus on maybe the tech world. Biotech is huge in some of our communities. For Bristol, we're just a proud manufacturing community. Years and years ago, everyone's father, mother, grandfather, grandmother worked in manufacturing in some way, right? And we take pride in that. There are communities that maybe not so much. They're pivoting and they're looking to bring in other industries. For us, we'll take them. You know, we'll take your manufacturers. Come to Bristol. It's cool to make things and I like that. I see that in younger folks coming up. It's cool to buy something that was made down the street or in the next town over, and we're embracing that.
That's awesome. And I think, you know, good place to be with so much exciting stuff happening in manufacturing. And we'll get to all that. And I want to definitely talk about how you guys think about embracing that, what makes Bristol unique and different from a manufacturing perspective. We've had people on the show that are in Bristol that love it and speak really highly of you and how embraced the city is. So I think it's love to hear about that. And maybe other towns and cities can learn from that to help Connecticut grow in that area, you know, overall. How did you get there, man? What got you into community development in the city of Bristol?
So I started in Bristol almost 15 years ago. I'm from Bristol, grew up in Bristol, and I started working for the city as a grant writer. So I tell people I sold the city on paper as a grant writer, right? So as a grant writer, you're pursuing funding, federal funding, state funding, for all sorts of different projects, because obviously the local taxpayers can't fund everything themselves, so we look to get assistance. So I did that for several years, and through that work, again, I practiced sort of my persuasive communication ability, but I also made a lot of friends. As a grant writer, you rely on other subject matter experts to get the job done. So I have a lot of great people that I work with that work for the city, but then also in the community. So through some retirements and some other opportunities, I sort of got the call up to try my hand at basically being the director of the department that I worked in, right? So as a grant writer, I worked in the Economic and Community Development Department, got the call up to director, and then I sort of quickly realized all those relationships that I made on my way up are even more valuable now as the director. And now I'm selling the city sometimes on paper, but More often than not, it's in situations like this, talking with folks, working with businesses directly, getting out of the office a little bit more. And again, in my position, I work as an advocate for our local businesses, local developers, and you can't miss the fact that in Bristol, there are so many businesses that are manufacturers, right? There really are. I call our manufacturing community the sort of the backbone, the foundation of our economy. It's not as large a segment as it obviously was 50, 75 years ago, but it's still a really important segment of our local economy. And so as Director of Economic Development, I better work on that segment since it's so large and so important. So we just started dreaming up different ways to help manufacturers.
So when you started kind of as the director, was the city sort of already focused on manufacturing as the backbone and supporting it? Was that something you brought to the table? Like,
I would love to take credit that I brought it to the table. I think that Bristol is, again, we're just a proud manufacturing community. So it's not like I all of a sudden said, hey, everyone, let's look at manufacturing and appreciate what they're doing. It's always been there, but maybe I built on that history through some of the work that I've done.
So how do you kind of, when you think about trying to create the environment that you want to have, I assume, help the businesses you have grow and prosper, and then also be attractive for new businesses to come to. How do you think about understanding what those needs are, right? I mean, you haven't been a manufacturer. So when you think about creating that environment, how do you go about figuring out what that means and what the companies are looking for?
Well, it's just this. It's the more that I get out there and meet our manufacturers, and we learn what their pain points are, the more we can hopefully help. I'm a government person, and I do believe government should help when it can. And if it can't help, just get out of the way, right? So we've gotten out of the way on some things, right? Well, we know we can't help, but my job is to find that little way that we might be able to help manufacturers deal with their issues. Again, we can't fix it all, obviously, but if we can help just a little bit. I have really great support from our mayor's office over the years, our current mayor and past mayors, great staff, great community that just supports what we do and how because and we'll probably get into it, but we offer different grants, right? We offer financial assistance to our manufacturers. We're using taxpayer money for that. But the community has been so supportive because the community gets it. You're helping out a major employer usually. Often our manufacturers are expanding, if they're expanding their building or adding equipment, they're helping the community through tax revenue. So it's all a cycle, and I just have to thank the community for supporting what we do.
Supporting that. So thinking about it's really interesting, right? So sometimes the best way to help is to do nothing, right? Yeah. Or stop doing something you don't like. So I'm just curious if maybe some examples in either direction. You said kind of talk to manufacturers and figure, hey, what's some stuff we should get out of the way on, and some stuff we've been able to help. I just wonder if maybe you could give some specifics.
So getting out of the way, often can be overregulation sometimes from government. Not so much on the local level, but you see it sometimes at the state and federal level, and those are my friends, right? So, but sometimes overregulation may be a little harsh, but if there's a way that we can make a business's path easier to achieve their objective, by stepping out of the way, or if not stepping out of the way, making the path easier. So checking the boxes, but making it that much easier for a business to expand. We do that. So I work with our folks in land use, in the building department, the fire marshal, the water department, just to see, and that's where those relationships come in, right, from those years ago, to see if there's a challenge, can we make it a little easier on the business? Now, how we can help, though, that's more my thing, right?
Let's do
it. Can I use an example? So
please.
One example, we travel out, we meet manufacturers, and one thing I started to pick up on is that manufacturers are really busy. Obviously, the employment issue is there, right? You must hear about that a lot. And because manufacturers are having a harder time finding help, the person at the top is often doing a lot of different things just to keep the business afloat and to keep the growth trajectory moving forward. So they may not have time to do, to attain ISO certification. Let me just use that as an example, right? They know that getting to ISO would help the business. It open up different revenue streams. They just don't have the time to do that. So I started to learn about a group called Constep in Connecticut. And there are other groups, but they come to mind. And you may know about Constep well, but they are essentially a consultant that manufacturers hire to deal with issues that the manufacturer either doesn't have time to deal with or they don't have the skills to deal with. So I started to realize if we can make it easier for a manufacturer to work with a group like Constep, well, everyone wins. The manufacturer can get to that next level. Again, to use the ISO certification, they can get to that next level, keep them growing, keep them hiring. So we created a grant program to help manufacturers work with a consultant like Constep or others to do things like attain ISO certification, to implement lean manufacturing, to solve their hiring issues. So it's not like a traditional grant program in which we help a business literally do new construction.
Right. Yeah, buy a piece of equipment, expand the building.
Right, which we have too, but this one's a little different. But and again, I have supportive mayors and supportive community. Justin, that actually makes sense. And we have now case studies. We're just sort of finishing up our first set of projects, but we did 2 ISO certification celebrations, like with Constep in the last month or two. And it's so cool to roll out the banner, the ISO certification banner, to see it up on the wall and just smiling faces. It's a way that local government can help that no one would ever think of.
So how did you figure out the ROI on that? Because I agree with you. So often when you think about the way government wants to help towns or otherwise, it's about buying something tangible, right?
Yeah.
Like somehow they just want to be able to touch it, right? Mm-hmm. They want to see a building went up, a site got cleaned up, mm-hmm. a new piece of equipment got bought, but you rarely see support when it comes to some of those softer things. But in today's day and age, those softer things are probably really meaningful.
So we drive around Bristol and we're visiting different businesses, and every community is this way. You have your large businesses that are always doing something new. They're adding onto their building. They're hiring a bunch of people. They're buying equipment. I love those businesses, right? We all do. But then there's other smaller businesses, manufacturers, that you drive by, and if you're not careful, you won't even really notice that they're there. They're smaller. But guess what? They're continuing to do what they do. They're employing people. They're pumping out great products, proud to be working in Bristol. So I started to think, how can we work with those smaller companies that they're not doing the sexy project, but they're continuing to do what they do. So that's kind of how this thing started with the, we call it the technical assistance grant, with the consultant grant, is those manufacturers are small, they're doing what they do, but they might want to actually grow a little bit, or they might, who knows what they're looking for. Let's create a program that's not based on new square footage, new equipment, that can help that group. So someday they can hopefully add the square footage in the equipment. So that's kind of how it happened. I just realized, I don't even know that manufacturer, but I bet you they're really good. And that's how we dreamt up this particular program. So it's actually designed for the smaller ones, actually.
For sure. And I think sometimes people sleep on the smaller businesses, right? But you can get a big ROI if you do it the right way. Was there any pushback from either the town, mm-hmm. or sometimes you sort of see these ideas come up, right? You see maybe it is like the economic development person. Someone dreams up this great idea and then gets in the local paper, and then someone's like, oh, corporate welfare or whatever. Did you get any of that pushback?
No.
None.
So I do try to stay off social media, so it's possible it was out there. But I think it's sometimes a distraction. I have a board of directors. I have my mayor, my staff, my colleagues, and they've all been very, very supportive of it. I haven't heard anything from the community. If anything, the grants are reasonable, right? So there's a cap on them, so they're not huge grants. But again, it's all about the delivery and the explanation. Once you explain to folks kind of what it means to a business, again, maybe it's just Bristol, and manufacturing is ingrained in us. Everyone has been super supportive of everything we put out. It's kind of like in the stock market, getting in early, right? Like finding that stock that's like a diamond in the rough and it's undervalued and no one's really paying attention to it, and you see potential there. So we sort of buy into our manufacturers that are smaller, kind of flying under the radar with the hopes, well, not even the hopes, that at least they continue to do what they do, but maybe they'll get to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, how can you go wrong making a business in your community better, right? So the worst case scenario is they maintain, right? And that's still positive. And a best case scenario is maybe it like flips a switch and they start to really grow, and you invested, what, 5, 10, 15, 20 grand in a grant or something like that. Next thing you know, boom, like, you know, you hit it and then they're growing, and that becomes something
And you
big.
said the word investment. That's what it is. We always talk in those terms. It's not a giveaway like the corporate welfare piece. We're not giving anything away. We're investing in folks.
How do you think about the return on the investment then in that type of soft thing, right? So that's, I think, the challenge a lot of people get behind, and why they get stuck helping to support buildings and buying equipment, is because it's like easy math, right? Oh, well, you know, this works because they just took up another acre and we improved the property. And so here are the tax rolls. And so someone does some easy math. I think when it comes to some of this other stuff, I imagine you got to be a little more creative.
You're right. That program in particular, because often there's not that concrete sort of black and white numbers game to it. It's about maintaining a business, and like you said, the worst case scenario is they maintain. Best case is they start to grow, and again, the investment's fairly small, but the payoff can be really, really big. You know, when you give a manufacturer ISO certification, when you help a manufacturer attain that, now all of a sudden the work that they can bid on expands exponentially, right? Now all of a sudden they need to do, overnight manufacturing, lights out manufacturing, and that means, okay, we're going to need to bring on someone for that, and the piece of equipment we're going to need for that. So again, the community's been very, very receptive once you explain it in those terms.
When you think about benefits to the local economy, is employment part of that? Because obviously when you're the state and you're dealing with like income tax or whatever, you could see sort of a return there, where the local community seems more based on like property taxes and sort of spend in the community. Do you think about growth in the employment base as a critical metric for Bristol?
Incredibly, probably the most critical metric that we have. Every mayor that comes in, the first thing that I talk about is the challenge around employment. And every community, it's not obviously unique to Bristol or anywhere else, but it's probably our most important, I'm going to say opportunity. I don't like to use the word challenge, because for us, we do look at it as an opportunity, and I'll get into an employment project that we're working on. But simply put, if manufacturers don't have the bodies to get in there and to train up, they're going to struggle. We all know that. So, but you have to make sure the business is stable sort of first. So that's where we go. Like to use that grant program as an example, we want to stabilize our businesses so they have the capability to hire, and then we want to help on the hiring piece. And part of the hiring challenge is really good marketing. There's so many different employment programs that come out every year, right? And everyone talks about employment in manufacturing, everyone. And everyone agrees that it's critical to get more folks interested in manufacturing as a career. The thing that gets left on the cutting room floor too often is the putting the money behind the marketing, getting out into the community and letting folks know that there's a better way. I always use the single mom who's a cashier, right? And she may have a young child at home. Maybe she has transportation issues. She gets it. She knows that there's training out there and there's more stable careers. It's just, how do you help her overcome some of her challenges? So we have to get the word out that, hey, guess what? We have childcare, believe it or not, that we can help you with. We have Uber. We have an Uber account. I can help you get a ride.
Do you?
Actually, I gave a grant to give to our adult education department to do that. So it's just about, it's two things. It's kind of eliminating the issues before they become an issue for someone, and it's about letting that person know what's out there.
Right, because
the biggest thing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's on your plate.
Well, kind of. Yeah, I always, every time that there's a meeting and there's someone from the workforce world or the state, and they're talking about this new initiative and this importance of training, I'm always the person to raise my hand and just say, that is amazing. Please, can you make sure that what percentage of your budget is dedicated towards getting the word out to folks,
Right.
reaching that cashier, as an example.
Yeah, but then you got the other component, which is really interesting. I hadn't thought about that too much, which is even if I am the cashier and I say, my God, I'd love to try that, then my next thing goes, but who's going to watch my kids after work?
Yeah.
And then the question is, and then how do I get there? And right, so kind of trying to make sure not only do they see the opportunity, but that they know that there's support for the challenges to even be able to grab that opportunity.
It's very real issues. I don't think there are a lot of folks that won't sort of agree and understand and want to pursue the training. Folks who are stuck in a job that may be at threat of, maybe it's a retail job. We know how brick and mortar retail is going, right? You're probably, as an employee, always wondering, oh my gosh, is my employer going to be the next one to shut down 500 U.S. stores, right? So they want to reach that stable career, do better for them and their families. It's just, how do I get there? And whatever, I've got a young child at home, I've got transportation issues. So it's just eliminating those issues before they...
What else does Bristol have? Well, I mean, you mentioned before workforce is such a critical, important thing for manufacturing. What is, you mentioned the items about thinking about how to get the word out. What else is Bristol doing to kind of provide manufacturers some benefit in terms of workforce development?
So we have a couple different programs that we're working on, but the one that's new, right? So it's almost like I'm kind of launching a little bit here. I want to go back to our chamber, right? So Chamber of Commerce, Cindy Bombard is the director of our chamber. She, along with the city and a lot of other great community partners, are launching something called Bristol Works. It's a completely local job training effort. So there are a lot of job training programs that are sort of regional in nature. We wanted to make this one local only because I think that we'll have a better chance at getting the word out locally. It's how important it is to us. So, and it'll be free for local residents, obviously. And it's designed, it really takes what our adult education department, Larry Covino, I've got to drop his name. I'm such a fan of Larry and what he does. Larry has been scraping together funding year after year to do a manufacturing training. It's an intro to manufacturing program. It's taking the kind of things that Larry's been doing and just expanding that, getting it out to our local residents. And obviously by helping our residents, we're helping our manufacturers, right? They need the help. Our residents need the employment opportunities. So ideally, we're helping everyone with that.
Right. So by sort of offering up the free training, getting them in there, do you partner with manufacturers to understand what their needs are? Like, how do you get people skilled up in the right direction so that when they do come out of the trainings, they're more likely to be successful?
So the curriculum was actually designed by our local manufacturers, right? So there's Rowley Spring in Bristol had a huge hand, I know, in writing the initial curriculum, working with Larry. Rowley Spring actually opened its doors, and it is one of the facilities that students can go into to get the hands-on training. The idea, though, behind the manufacturing piece is we know that every manufacturer is going to be different. They're going to have their way of doing things. What you want to provide through these students are students who at least understand this is for them, right? They have some mechanical aptitude, but really it's about they understand the environment. They're not going to be sort of surprised by what it means to work in a manufacturing environment. Hopefully they're open-minded and can accept that specific training from each manufacturer. Believe it or not, in Bristol, of course we have needs for folks who are very advanced, the tool makers, the engineers, things like that. But there's always opportunities for folks that are literally open-minded and willing to learn. There's a ton of opportunities like that in Bristol. And you could do really well financially. And that's part of the effort on getting that message out to the community is if you kind of have some mechanical aptitude and you're just open-minded and want to grow, manufacturing is probably for you.
Yeah, a lot of opportunity there. What kind of manufacturing is in Bristol? For folks that don't know and don't live in Bristol, like what kind of manufacturing is in Bristol?
So we have a little bit of everything. We have the smaller, I call them mom and pop, spring and stamping shops, screw machine manufacturing. So we're kind of known as like the spring stamping, screw machine, force slide. We have companies that literally relocated or opened up second locations. You know, they're from elsewhere in the country, but they just heard, oh, Bristol has the 4-slide folks, right? People who know that game. So we have that, and they're more sort of traditional. You would walk in and, okay, this is a manufacturing environment. Everything is so clean these days, by the way, so it's really not what you think of, but it's still, people would get it. But then we have the higher tech folks. I know Bauer was here recently, Arthur G. Russell, they're a great company. They're the larger, sort of more technical, almost lab coat kind of a manufacturing, heavy on the engineers. So we have a nice variety there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And so when you think about, so you talked a little about the technical assistance program. You've talked about, workforce development. What other support programs do you guys have for manufacturers, and how do you think about supporting those businesses?
We have an equipment grant that, again, that's fairly unique too, in that this actually, we started the manufacturing equipment grant years ago, but again, as I was actually fairly new in this role, but I started to realize how important equipment was to manufacturers. Literally, it's the difference between work and not work, right? You can attain certain levels, certain pieces of work with this if you have the certain type of equipment. And then the equipment almost always means that you need to hire at least one person, one or two people. So we created, we call it the 5% manufacturing grant. It's not a very sexy name, but it provides...
Informative, though, I would imagine.
I guess it's very descriptive, but it provides 5% of the cost of new manufacturing equipment, which doesn't sound like a lot, but some of this equipment is wild. I mean, $500,000 is nothing for new equipment. So, and that's fairly revolutionary, at least for Bristol, because to your point, there wasn't a direct payback at the end, because a lot of manufacturing equipment is tax exempt, right? So I couldn't talk about, well, if we invest this amount in this piece of equipment, we'll get it back in taxes. No, actually, in most cases. So even then, it was about explaining, but this piece of equipment most likely will enable the hiring of someone. But most importantly, it keeps that business not only afloat, but actually it opens up new revenue streams for them. So the equipment's incredibly important. So that's a program that we offer. We're trying to wrap our heads around the job training piece and the workforce piece. There's a technical assistance piece. And then there are the more established programs. If a manufacturer is adding square footage or building a new building, we have grants for that, and that's based on tax revenue and all that sort of stuff. And then we also actually have what's called an urban jobs community, state tax abatement. So the state actually helps us out here. Manufacturers that are either coming into Bristol for the first time, or they're here, but they relocate to another location in Bristol, are eligible for a 5-year, 80% tax abatement on their real property, believe it or not. So great tool that we're very, very fortunate to be working with the state on. So it doesn't hurt, right?
It does not.
When we're talking
does not hurt.
with manufacturers about the opportunity to build in one of our industrial parks or whatever, they're looking at a building, that's a great little bonus to have.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I kind of want to take it on a little bit of a bigger picture, sort of thinking about, Bristol's one part of a larger community, right? Mm-hmm. And so I wonder how you think about your relationship with economic and community development groups in other towns, in other cities, in the state, and your thoughts around how do we sort of work together to make the whole state economy better versus Bristol competing with Berlin. I don't know if that's even a thing, but I was just sort of, randomly picking out another city. Like, how do you think about, working together collaboratively for the whole to be great, even though we've got to have stuff in our cities too?
You need to. I mean, that's so true. Like, obviously we need to take care of ourselves, but you use Berlin as an example, or New Britain or Plainville or Southington. When those communities do well economically, we do well. If a new, we'll use manufacturing, comes out from out of state and opens up a new plant in Southington, that's great for us. Mm-hmm. I don't sit there and cry because they didn't come to Bristol, right? It's more about they're right over the line. I bet a significant percentage of their employees will be from Bristol. So that mindset is shared. The economic development community folks on, my colleagues within the state all share that mindset. I would never call a company from another community and go, hey, why don't you just forget about that community, come over to Bristol.
That doesn't happen?
No, I mean, it may. I don't do that. It's about, doing what you do a little bit, maybe investing in some marketing for your community, peacocking a little bit, and then just, if folks are interested, give me a call, right? And it's always about like a second location or something like that. We don't push the idea of relocation. Hey, exhaust your resources in that community. If you can't find something that works, let's talk. But
right, certainly better for them to go from Berlin to Bristol than from out of state, right? So that
exactly, keep it in state.
Keep it
in state.
Yeah. So is there groups, like do the different community and economic and community development directors around your area get together and sort of talk about how to market the area as a, right? Because I mean, we talked about this a little bit off camera, right? Bristol has about 60,000 residents. It's been pretty stable for a long time. And so at some point, right, I mean, obviously, full employment, something, but if you have businesses and they want to grow, they need to be able to pull people from other towns and they need to have, right? So do you guys talk about that and look at that?
I should do, every New Year's I make a resolution. I need to get more involved with some of our professional organizations, but we have great ones. CEDIS is one that comes to mind. Again, and they're focused, actually someone that worked with me, Kristen Gorski, she's in West Hartford now.
Yeah.
She's my counterpart there. So she heads up CEDIS, right? And I always tell her, I got to get more involved. But great groups like CEDIS and others, CCM, there's some others that, of course, I'm blanking on their names now, but it's definitely a movement. And again, we all recognize the same challenges and opportunities, and a lot of it revolves around workforce.
How do you think about getting the word out about Bristol? Is it mostly sort of retailing, retail politicking, as it were, like, kind of one-to-one talking to folks and developing those relationships?
It's everything, right? Like everything positive. So, I mean, we do everything from video series highlighting small businesses. We always talk about the importance of marketing Bristol, obviously to the outside world, but probably also just as important as to ourselves, right? When we do a video profile, we're working on something, we're going to profile a young woman in manufacturing, right? I'm just as hopeful that our own community will see that and just have a feeling of pride as some manufacturing company halfway across the state that's looking at opening up a second location. Like it's the same to me. We have to market Bristol to Bristol sometimes. And a lot of times it's that pride thing. Like it's cool. You want it to be cool to say you're from Bristol or you make things in Bristol, right? That young woman cashier I keep talking about, I want her to see that and obviously think, okay, maybe give this a shot. So it's good marketing is everything, everywhere, all the time.
Listen, I love that. We got to love the ones we have, not just the ones that we hope to get in the future,
True,
right?
true.
Because
Yeah.
maintaining is so important. Justin, man, it's been great talking about Bristol. I know you guys are doing some awesome stuff, and I'm really pleased that you came on. I'm glad Bill Hazard got us together. Got to throw a little
Thank
love.
you,
Novo
Bill.
Precision.
Thanks Bauer too. I think Bauer was here.
And Bauer was here as well. Before we go though, I want to flip to a rapid fire round of questions. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, man. Red Sox or Yankees?
If I had to choose, I would choose the Sox, but I'm actually not a baseball guy.
Well, let's stick with the good answer, which was the Red Sox. So we'll stick with that. Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Probably Starbucks there.
A staycation?
But I'm going to say Real Cafe and Roasted Bean in Bristol. two independent coffee shops.
There you go. Nice plug.
Yeah.
You a staycation or exotic destination kind of guy?
Usually staycation.
iPhone or Android?
Android.
If you had your choice, you go high-end sports car or SUV?
High-end sports car.
Got a favorite business book?
I don't think so. I often read a lot not about business. I have enough of that during the workday. I'm reading like personal finance and self-improvement stuff usually.
Self-improvement stuff? Nice. If you could do anything, Justin, other than be the Director of Economic and Community Development in Bristol and had to be something else, it could be anything in the whole wide world, what would you do?
I was asked this question as a high schooler. I said late night talk show host. I'll just stick with that for fun.
I like that. What's something that you think you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Work hard and treat people well. It doesn't get any simpler than that.
I like that. What's something you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Justin, and if he'd listened to you, you think it'd make a real positive impact on his life?
Communicate. That's a big, I feel when you work with staff, you have to almost over communicate, bring people in, let them be part of what you're doing, and it just works out that way.
Over communicate to your team, man.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong there. Yeah. Justin, thank you so much for coming on today. Appreciate hearing all about what's going on in Bristol and wish you guys the best of luck.
Thanks so much.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by CompassMSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.